Been looking forward to a post like this to share mine. I actually like reading people's experiences more than trying to glean something from blurry security footage. So one of my closest friends growing up lived in a house that was beyond a reasonable doubt haunted AF. The house was definitely somewhere around a century old, or at least now it is, and our town was situated in a very woodsy suburb. He and every member of his family had experiences there. Several of our friends had their own experiences there, and I had my own too. Honestly, it would be impossible to try and condense it down into one experience, and I believe it's worth sharing the accounts I can remember. I'll start with the least scary one, which was thankfully my own, and then move to the ones worth telling. During high school, my parents went on vacation, and for a few days I stayed at this particular house of my friend. Let's call him Paul. I stayed in Paul's room in a sleeping bag on the floor while he slept in his bed. One morning, I woke up to someone whispering in my ear, like directly into my ear, "OP, you need to leave. Now." It did not say this super maliciously, more of a warning. It definitely woke me up though, and immediately I'm thinking Paul was effing with me as he frequently did, but I turned around to my right where he was sleeping and realized he was completely out. I said "what?" to him, thinking he was joking around, and he didn't wake up. He was definitely asleep. It was quiet and still too early for even Paul's parents to be up. Then it hit me, as it still hits me today. I heard the whisper in my left ear, and Paul was on my right side. Paul had other experiences in that same room. A few I can remember off the top of my head. For a time, he told me he suffered from sleep paralysis on a consistent basis. He would see demons in his room and would be unable to move. He told me that very frequently in his sleep, the standing fan by his bed would become a demon girl, and he would wake up with a jolt of adrenaline having punched or thrown the fan down to the ground. He told me he would sometimes see someone standing in the closet his bed faced, both asleep and awake. Oddly enough, his sleep paralysis significantly decreased as soon as he moved out of that place. That floor, the second floor where Paul, his parents, and two of his 4 sisters slept, was spooky. I remember getting weird feelings up there. One of his sisters claimed to see the ghost of a little boy in their bathroom. His mom once opened the closet in her bedroom to find the same little boy standing in there looking up at her and asking for his mom. I heard about that one when I was in middle school, and it always creeped me out. It's always scarier when the adults see them too. Before my own experience, I generally thought Paul was just trying to F with me when he would tell me about those other experiences. Most of our other friends were the same way, thinking Paul was full of poop. Even after my own experience, at times I thought I just as easily could have dreamt it up. But then, a few of those same friends, some of them complete non-believers beforehand, had their own experiences, and that changed my whole idea of the house. Once a year, Paul and his family would take a trip and have someone take care of their 2 dogs. One of our mutual friends came over to do just that one day. When she got there that evening to feed the dogs, the house was dark and empty. For some context, the dogs were being fed near the kitchen, and adjacent to the kitchen was the dining room, which led further away into the entryway, and after that a small living room. Well, not long after feeding the dogs, she heard a blood-curdling scream. A dang shriek coming from that living room, like someone was inside with her. She booked it outside with the dogs, checked for intruders, and saw no one was there. I'm pretty sure after that she called Paul, told him what happened, and he laughed and said, "Yeah, stuff like that happens sometimes." A couple years later, one of the bigger doubters in our group, who thought all of us were full of poop, had his own experience. Paul hosted a fair amount of parties back then, and usually we would use his basement to avoid any sort of noise complaints. All of us are in the basement having a good time, and this particular friend of ours decides to run up and grab another drink from upstairs. Mind you, this friend is not the kind of guy to get completely effed up. Like, he'll only ever have a beer or 2 at most. So for all intents and purposes, he's sober. He goes up, and the ground floor was completely empty as everyone is in the basement. There was a porch directly outside the dining room, entryway, living room, and it extended long ways across the back of the house. As our friend was walking into the dining room to grab a beer off the table, He sees a tall, grim-looking woman standing on the porch outside, looking through the window directly at him. He knows something is wrong because she's sort of featureless and also standing outside by herself, looking inside. He takes his eyes off her for one moment, looks back, and she's gone. A few days later, he tells Paul what happened, and Paul tells him how he and his siblings have seen that same woman before. Our friend becomes a believer. The basement was creepy as heck, but I can only think of one thing that ever happened down there. It was more of a storage cellar than anything. We still used it for parties and just generally hanging out, but it was so cluttered with random stuff that whole areas of the room were completely cut off. At some point in college one summer when I was back home, Paul and his family were doing the annual Throw Old Stuff Away Fest, and he openly invited some friends to come help. I came one day, and when I got there, Paul's dad nonchalantly told me, "You get to see the secret room." Turns out that in the far corner of the basement, behind a bunch of clutter, was a little storage closet nobody, besides maybe Paul's parents, knew about. We investigated it that day, and in it we found a bunch of random old stuff. I can't remember everything exactly. I don't even know if Paul's family knew what this stuff was. But among it, I specifically remember finding this very old-fashioned vintage music box. You know, like the one in The Conjuring with the dancing ballerina, that kind of thing. We decided it was creepy and didn't want anything to do with it and left it in that closet. Well, on a different day, when I thankfully was not there, Paul and another friend were cleaning out the basement when suddenly that same music box started playing by itself from behind the door of the closet. They were alone and had not been in that closet all day. They bolted up the stairs. At the top of the house there were 2 small bedrooms, both belonging to Paul's older sisters. This is the last one I will share, as it's the story that stuck with me the longest. The second oldest sister once had a vivid and intense dream in which she herself was being exorcised. A demon was being forced out of her as a group of priests were standing over her convulsing body, shouting verse at her, and she remembered it just being crazy intense. After enduring this for some time, she suddenly jolts herself awake and yells, and at that precise moment, a rosary she kept hanging on her wall flies from its place, crashes to the floor, and shatters into a bunch of pieces, completely on its own. She was covered in sweat and completely terrified. No one else was in the room. Yeah, that place was effing haunted.